I think there will be a significant impact. Shareholder activism has been on the rise in Europe, in the UK specifically, and in continental Europe. And we have seen a lot more US activists invest overseas into the UK market. The interest is continuing. I spoke to a few of our clients and friends of the firm before this conference here in London, and all of them seem to universally feel that there are value opportunities in the UK that were ripe for activism, especially with the global markets having generally been up, save for recent fluctuations. And for a variety of reasons, these valuation propositions continue to be present here in the UK. Whether it is depressed valuations as a result of uncertainty surrounding Brexit, whether it's really a reflection of the currency and the strong dollar, but these valuation propositions are still here. And universally, the expectation is that there will be more activism in the UK, more US-based activism in the UK. And I think that that inevitably leads to sort of a cross-pollination of ideas. When you do have US activists coming into the UK market, they bring some of the strategies that have been successful for them in the past in the United States. One of the interesting developments that's not very recent, but it has gained more speed, and which I personally would expect to become more of a common phenomenon in the UK market, is the existence of what we in the United States call settlement agreements or cooperation agreements. More recently, here they take the form of relationship agreements, but in substance it's the same tool. It is a more formalized agreement that an activist on the one hand and a company on the other hand can reach to solidify the deal that they have reached on some of the changes at companies where the activist is involved. I think we may see a proliferation of those in the UK market. There are some, including ones that we've negotiated in recent times, but I think that they make sense here. They allow companies to continue this behind-the-scenes dialogue with the activists and at the same time really solidify and put into paper, put into a formal agreement some of the understanding that they've reached with activists. ESG has become recently a hotter topic than it has ever been in the United States. We saw not too long ago Trian and Value Act set up funds that were specifically dedicated to ESG issues. Just last month, I believe it was, that JANA, in cooperation with CalSTRS, also driven by ESG concerns, issued a public letter to Apple, focusing on some social issues surrounding the use of iPhones. All of this has generated a lot of attention in the media and in the investment community in the United States. The way that ESG is treated as a topic in the United States is quite different, it seems to me, from what I have seen here in the UK. In the UK, there's a more formalized approach to putting forward proposals. In the United States, activists have not really put forward proposals, or what is referred to as 14A8 proposals, which are those proposals that go into companies' proxy materials, quite as much. This has been something that institutional investors, governance experts have focused on, but activists haven't really made it their priority and the focus in their campaigns. I would predict that at least in the initial stages of this sort of focus on ESG issues, we will continue to see activists relying more on public campaigns, like the JANA letter to CalSTRS, and pronouncements like Trian's determination to set up a fund or a Value Act, and just their public statements that they are really focused on these issues, rather than actual proposals. Those proposals, in reality, are non-binding. They take a significant period of time to play out, and they are not always easily tied to the investment strategy of activists. At the end of the day, activists are always focused on the performance of companies. So for them, ESG is one of many areas they look into, but not for the sake simply of those issues. It's for the sake of ultimately enhancing the performance of the company through improved ESG treatment by the companies. So I think we will continue to see this sort of on a company-by-company basis, if you will, with activists pushing for specific improvements in specific companies and doing so less through business proposals in the company's proxy materials and more through public campaigns and letters and just agitation in the media. I think that in Europe generally and in the UK specifically, ESG is far more broadly considered as good and important corporate governance. In the United States, this is only now picking up speed, at least in the world of activists. I would expect, and actually in quite a few respects in the UK, you see a lot of codification, whether it's even in the form of comply or explain, so it may not be strictly mandatory, but often the solution to addressing some of these issues is compiling certain guidelines that companies follow at their option, or otherwise they explain their non-compliance. In the United States, there generally issues of this nature have been left for companies to tackle on their own. And that has sometimes meant that shareholders, both activists and just institutional investors, all kind of investors who are interested in companies and interested in these issues, have had to engage with specific companies on the specific issue that they care about in order to see some discrete improvement in the area of ESG. I would expect that to continue. This is one of the main differences, and I think it's just generally in each case it's a reflection of the climate and of the general approach in these two different jurisdictions. So that's probably going to continue to be the case. I wouldn't expect a wave of ESG proposals in the United States, especially since right now there is a little bit of sort of uncertainty from a technical perspective, not to get too technical on this point, but there have been some recent guidances on the part of the SEC regarding business proposals submitted to the companies to include in their proxy materials. And in those recent pronouncements, the SEC had actually opined that they may rely more on the boards in the determination of when these exclusions are appropriate, based on whether they constitute ordinary business or otherwise. And there's still a little bit of a flux. Some of the teeth of these business proposals have been taken away in the United States. So we will see to what extent this as a tool, proposals of this nature continue to be popular in the United States or effective with activists. There's actually quite a bit of focus on corporate governance issues in Europe. In fact, many would probably argue that shareholders have more rights here and enjoy better corporate governance than they do in the United States. And in fact, some would argue that that's one of the reasons why we see fewer contests in the UK than we do in the United States. In the United States, again, it's more of a company-by-company regime rather than guidelines that all companies are subject to. And therefore, activists and other investors have been able to identify weaknesses there and that have become the core of their campaigns. In terms of corporate governance developments, it's interesting the focus, if I may just point out to one distinction, it's interesting the focus that activists and institutions and governance experts place here in the UK on remuneration, the level of disclosure, the level of transparency, and a lot of effort is going into reining in the compensation of executives here in the UK. In the United States, at least in this past 1 year, but I think even generally, CEO compensation has been approached from a very different perspective. The focus is not so much on disclosure and transparency as much as it is on the performance of the CEO. And therefore, last year we saw a number of very high-profile campaigns that targeted CEOs because they were perceived as underperforming, they were the vulnerable spot in a company that was undervalued, and campaigns really focused on replacing them rather than trying to reduce their compensation or create more disclosure relating to their compensation. Not to say that executive compensation is not a very, very important issue in the United States. It's just interesting to see how the approach has been slightly different in the two jurisdictions. But I would predict that in terms of corporate governance in the UK, there's actually already a lot of ground movement here on the ground that is probably not going to be dramatically influenced by the incoming US activists, so to speak. To some extent, US activists, with their focus on ultimately delivering value to shareholders, may help ground some corporate governance concerns into how do they reflect on the bottom line at the end of the day. That may be just a slight I think change in the conversation, in the direction of the conversation. And I would predict that in terms of a specific mechanism, as I mentioned, that through relationship agreements potentially, and really formalized agreements between activists and companies, we may see some improvements on the corporate governance seen at particular companies in the UK as well.